The invitation came quietly, but the impact would not be. When Meghan Markle agreed to appear on Jimmy Kimmel Live, the public saw it as just another media stop, a chance to promote her latest foundation initiative, a soft reset after weeks of relentless headlines. But for Meghan, it was more than that. It was a test. She had grown careful with appearances. Public exposure came at a cost now. Every expression was analyzed, every word turned into a weapon or a shield. Still, she accepted the offer. She told her team, "It'll be 10 minutes. I'll speak from the heart. If they twist it, that's on them." The studio that night buzzed louder than usual. Security was doubled. Producers triple-checked every card Jimmy might use. Nothing controversial. No curveballs. Just an easy segment. That was the agreement. But backstage, something shifted. Jimmy's tone was different during rehearsal. Lighter, but sharper. His head writer had rewritten parts of the opener at the last minute. No one told Meghan. She arrived 10 minutes before her cue. Black suit. No jewelry. Quiet confidence. The kind she wore like armor now. Jimmy greeted her with a hug. "You look well," he said, smiling. Meghan smiled back, but her instinct registered something else behind his eyes. Not malice. Not quite. But something colder than charm. The show began like any other. The crowd laughed. The lights danced. The music blared. Jimmy's opening monologue poked fun at politics, celebrities, and himself. And then he said it. And later tonight, we're joined by a woman who knows what it's like to be both a duchess and a headline. Please welcome Meghan Markle, or as the tabloids call her, the woman who ruined brunch in Britain. The audience laughed. Not loudly. Not comfortably. Meghan stepped onto the stage. She didn't flinch. She waved, sat down, crossed her legs, and looked straight ahead. Jimmy leaned in. "So Meghan," he began, "you've had quite the journey, from royalty to California. That's not a commute most people can make." Meghan smiled. "I don't think anyone's life is quite as simple as the headlines make it seem, Jimmy." He nodded. "But some of those headlines, they do have a little truth in them, right?" The audience laughed again, a little harder now. Meghan's smile faded just slightly. "I think headlines are designed to distract from truth, not reflect it," she said. Jimmy flipped a card. "Well said. But let me ask you this. Do you miss the palace drama? Or are the Netflix boardrooms dramatic enough for you these days?" It was a line meant to be funny, but the tone landed wrong. Even Jimmy seemed to realize it as it left his mouth. Meghan didn't blink. "I think what you call drama, Jimmy, I call survival." The room shifted. Audience members stopped chuckling. Producers watched from offstage. The tension didn't break. Jimmy leaned back, smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. "Okay," he said. "Let's talk about this new project of yours. Something about children and digital well-being. Important stuff." Meghan nodded, grateful for the pivot. But she also knew that wasn't going to be the last time he veered off course. The audience leaned forward. They were ready to laugh. But something about the mood on stage had changed. Jimmy Kimmel flipped to his next card, holding it like a shield. "So, this new foundation. It's about digital safety for kids, right? Helping them navigate social media?" Meghan nodded. "Yes. It's about giving parents tools. It's about giving children the right to not be targets." Jimmy smiled, but not kindly. "That's admirable. Although, some people might say you've spent the last few years using the media more than running from it." The crowd gave a mixed reaction. A few quiet laughs. A few gasps. A lot of stillness. Meghan's face didn't move. "I think using your voice to protect others is very different from using someone else's pain to entertain," she said. Jimmy raised his eyebrows. "Is that what you think I'm doing right now?" There it was. The moment. The mask began to slip. Meghan met his gaze. "I think when you bring someone on your show, you choose whether to have a conversation or stage a spectacle." Jimmy chuckled. "I'm just asking the questions people ask when the cameras aren't around." Meghan leaned in slightly. "Then maybe that's part of the problem." The air inside the studio grew heavy. Jimmy tapped his cards, stalling for rhythm. "Let's lighten this up a bit. You once said that every woman has a voice, and she deserves to be heard. But don't you think there's something ironic about saying that from a $14 million Montecito estate?" The laughter this time was louder. Not because it was funnier, but because discomfort has a sound, and sometimes it hides behind applause. Meghan sat still. Then she said something the show's editors would later try to cut. Privilege doesn't cancel pain, Jimmy. And pain doesn't cancel purpose. The crowd quieted. Not a word from the co-hosts. Not a whisper from the producers in the wings. It was Jimmy who finally blinked. "You're very composed," he said, almost amused. "You rehearsed that?" Meghan's voice didn't change. "I lived it." For the first time, Jimmy looked away. It was subtle, barely a shift, but it broke the rhythm. And that was when he decided to double down. "Well," he said, holding the card higher now, "if you don't want to talk about the media, how about this? A lot of people are wondering, are you planning to run for office?" The question had not been cleared. It wasn't on the list. Even his head writer looked surprised. Meghan stared at him. Not angry, just done. "I didn't come here to speculate about power," she said. "I came here to talk about responsibility." Jimmy gave a tight smile. "Same thing in this country, isn't it?" It was a joke, but no one laughed. And Meghan Markle knew exactly what she needed to do next. She unpinned her microphone. She stood up. She looked toward the wings where her team was already moving. Then she turned back to Jimmy. "I think we're done here." And that was when the audience erupted, not in laughter, but in disbelief. Meghan stepped off stage before the segment had ended. She didn't storm out. She didn't yell. She simply walked, straight-backed, unshaken, past the cameras, past the crew, and into the kind of silence that doesn't follow drama but truth. Her team followed. Calm, efficient, already fielding phone calls from publicists and executive handlers. Inside the studio, Jimmy Kimmel stayed in his seat. The audience watched him, waiting for something clever. But there was no punchline this time. "Well," Jimmy finally said, smiling thinly, "I guess she had somewhere else to be." Some of the audience laughed. Others didn't. Backstage, a young segment producer was on the phone with Network Legal. Her voice low, controlled. She left mid-taping. No, she wasn't under contract for a second segment. No, there was no clause requiring post-interview comments. Yes, it's already trending. She hung up and stared down the hallway where Meghan had disappeared. She didn't say it out loud, but she understood what was happening. This wasn't going to be a funny clip online. This was going to be a moment. In the control room, the lead editor sat frozen. He didn't cut to commercial. He let the cameras run long enough to catch Jimmy's reaction in full. That decision would later become the center of the entire fallout. Not the questions, not the walk-off, but the expression Jimmy Kimmel made when he realized the room no longer belonged to him. A few minutes later, Jimmy tried to salvage it. He turned to the crowd. "You know, it's tough being famous, but it's not always tough being gracious." He laughed. No one else did, because the audience hadn't forgotten what Meghan said just before removing her mic. "I didn't come here to speculate about power. I came here to talk about responsibility." That sentence wasn't built for applause. It was built to echo, and echo it did. Within the hour, the clip was online. But it wasn't the network who uploaded it. It was a woman in the third row who had recorded part of the segment on her phone. No edits. No captions. Just raw footage of Meghan looking Jimmy in the eye, saying her line, then leaving the stage without waiting for permission. By midnight, the video had more than 1 million views. By morning, the headlines had changed. Not "Meghan walks off set," but "Meghan defends integrity after unexpected questioning." Why the audience didn't laugh with Jimmy Kimmel last night. Responsibility isn't a punchline. Behind closed doors, the network scrambled. Not because they feared Meghan Markle, but because they feared what her silence would mean if she chose to keep it. The next morning, Jimmy Kimmel arrived at the studio earlier than usual. There were no jokes scribbled on the cue cards waiting on his desk. Just a printed stack of headlines. None of them flattering. He read them without comment. But the producers noticed the way he held his coffee. Both hands. A grip too tight for comfort. The network didn't issue a statement. They hoped the moment would pass, like others had before. But it didn't. Because this one was different. The footage wasn't framed by opinion or debate. It wasn't shaped by edits or spin. It was just a woman calmly stating her boundary and leaving when it was crossed. And it was Jimmy who had crossed it. Later that day, an anonymous crew member leaked a rehearsal note to the press. Jimmy had been warned twice not to ask about political ambitions. Not because it was off limits, but because it was irrelevant to the stated purpose of the interview. The foundation Meghan was there to discuss had nothing to do with office or power. And yet, the question had been written in, and not by accident. A former guest, an actor who had appeared on the show just weeks before, posted a quiet message online. "I've been on that set. You can feel when the room turns." Last night, it turned. He didn't name Jimmy. He didn't name Meghan. He didn't need to. The audience already knew. On the next night's show, Jimmy tried to lighten it all. He opened with a self-deprecating line. "So apparently I'm not great at small talk." The audience laughed, but it was nervous laughter. Not because they disagreed with him, but because it didn't feel like a joke anymore. A senior writer on his team resigned quietly that week. She left a handwritten note on her desk. "It's not about whether you get the laugh. It's about whether you deserve the stage." Meanwhile, Meghan released nothing. No statement. No tweet. No subtle clarification. Her team declined all interview requests. The silence wasn't strategic. It was final, and that made it louder than anything Jimmy could say. Industry insiders began speaking in whispers, not because they feared backlash, but because they understood what had happened. A line had been crossed on national television, and the person who walked away from it wasn't the one who lost ground. 2 weeks passed. The clip had settled into digital permanence. Not viral in the way that burns fast and fades, but viral in the way that roots itself in the cultural memory. Every few hours, it would resurface on timelines. The moment Meghan stood. The moment she said nothing more than she needed to say. The moment Jimmy Kimmel didn't know what to do next. The industry noticed. Not in loud statements. Not in scolding op-eds. But in changed invitations. Several upcoming guests quietly declined appearances on Jimmy Kimmel Live. One publicist cited tone inconsistencies. Another said, "My client's values won't be served by this platform at this time." No one used the word boycott. No one had to. Meanwhile, Meghan remained out of view. She didn't schedule interviews. She didn't tweet. She returned to meetings, to staff briefings, to the quiet work that had brought her on that stage in the first place. Her foundation's funding doubled that month. A letter from a school principal in Ohio reached her team. It simply read, "Thank you for showing our girls how to walk out when they're not being heard." It wasn't shared online. It wasn't posted for clicks. It was kept, framed, and hung quietly on an office wall. Inside Jimmy's writer's room, a change was happening too. No one said it aloud, but the tone of the show softened. The jokes turned safer. The monologues leaned inward. There was a weariness now, a subtle retreat from the edge. Jimmy didn't mention Meghan's name again, not because he'd been told not to, but because he understood that he'd said enough. More than enough. One night, during a taping break, a young camera operator approached him backstage. She had never spoken to him before. She simply said, "You used to listen better," and then walked away. Jimmy didn't respond. He went home that night earlier than usual. He didn't check social media. He didn't write. He sat in the kitchen and stared at the notes from that night, still tucked in his drawer. The final card he never got to read said, "So what do you want your legacy to be?" It was meant to be the closer. A big finish. But the moment never came. Because Meghan answered it without ever hearing the question. She answered it by standing up, not for a point, but for herself. And in doing so, she rewrote the ending. Not just of the interview, but of how people remember it. Not as a confrontation, but as a correction. Not as drama, but as dignity.